Welcome back to Posting Through It. I'm Jared.
And I'm Mike.
I'm Ben.
Welcome back another week. We got a huge response to the Jeffrey Epstein episode. Thank you for that. And in addition to tons of downloads, we also got a lot of contributions in our tip jar, which is linked in the description of every episode. Thank you so much for that. It goes a long way, even if it's not life-changing money. You know, we make this show with our own time and with our own dimes, and it keeps things moving along. On this episode, we've got Ben Lorber. He's a senior research analyst at Political Research Associates and the co-author of the book, Safety Through Solidarity, A Radical Guide to Fighting Antisemitism. But, fellas, we got to discuss the elephant in the room, or rather, the little red gremlin from Sesame Street. I'm talking about Elmo.
Yes.
On July 13th, if you are still on X for whatever reason, you may have been surprised to see this blast of crazy posts coming from the little guy. He's got 6,500 followers, which he treated to messages like, "Kill all Jews." Elmo says all Jews should die. And my personal favorite, "Release the files at Real Donald Trump, child fucker." The posts were deleted, and on July 15th, Elmo posted a statement, which is a very dystopian sentence to say, I should add. Elmo said, or I guess Sesame Street said, whoever, Elmo said, on Sunday, Elmo's X account was briefly hacked by an outside party, in spite of the security measures in place. We strongly condemn the abhorrent anti-Semitic and racist content, and the account has since been secured. These posts in no way reflect the values of Sesame Workshop or Sesame Street, and no one at the organization was involved. Well, that didn't really stop some groups, like we're going to talk about today, from identifying Christina Vitas, who is the social media manager who runs Elmo's X account. I guess little gremlins can't post for themselves, so Christina is the woman tasked with helping Elmo translate his thoughts to the screen. And yeah, they took her to task for some reason. A post that stood out that Mike and I were kind of making fun of privately that I wanted to talk about was from this group called Canary Mission. Ben, can you help listeners understand what Canary Mission is?
Yeah. I mean, Canary Mission has been around for about a decade now, and it's essentially an operation that exists primarily to smear, people who support justice and freedom for Palestinians by accusing us of being anti-Semitic. I mean, I have a Canary Mission profile. I think I got it in 2018, and it basically pulls from your social media accounts. It scours the internet, for pictures. It posts your employer, and its primary purpose is to send, troll armies to harass people, to call their places of work, to call their universities. It mostly targets students, of course, and a lot of the targets are first generation Palestinian, Arab and Muslim undergraduates. So the goal is just to really have a chilling effect on the Palestine solidarity movement, and it's been it sometimes is effective, and it's just a really hard example of the lengths that Israel's defenders can go to Israel's crimes.
I just want to interject that Ben's Jewish, so I think that's an important. He's on this list, so.
Yeah, so Canary Mission keeps these databases of people. It's been criticized as a doxing website. I don't know that that's the terms I would use, but that's what critics have said. Canary Mission, if you follow the news closely, you might have heard of it because it has been drawn upon by the Trump administration as it tries to decide who it should target for deportations and revoking student visas of people that criticize Israel on U.S. soil while being foreign citizens. So on July 15th, after Elmo said he was hacked, again, what a strange sentence, they called for a real investigation into what happened and to fire the person responsible, who we mentioned earlier, Christina Vitas. They seem pretty skeptical of the original story. No proof, no apology, no accountability. Again, we're talking about a little red gremlin, right? We're talking about a hacked X account. But they proceeded to target Christina Vitas in a thread on X, demanding that she face accountability, aka that she gets fired. Followers of Canary Mission I've seen them circulating Christina Vitas' email address, her various social media profiles, calling on her to be fired and more. I would hate to see what her inbox looks like. The whole situation is just like kind of ridiculous, but especially on X these days, this is kind of what like the quote unquote like fight against anti-Semitism online is starting to resemble more and more. It's like all these sort of weird organizations like Canary Mission or Beitar Worldwide, just like plucking out random things from the internet and being like, hell must be paid for this transgression. Elmo must be carpet bombed. And like the entirety of Sesame Street must be leveled to the ground.
Yeah, they're gonna like you could deny them, food and water for like months. That is a horrible joke, but we have to laugh in the face of these atrocities.
No, we're fine. We're fine. I immediately asked Jared whether we felt that like Elmo deserved the chair or lethal injection from this, but like
at the very least, Big Bird should be sanctioned.
Right, yeah. No, but one thing that stood out to me about this is it's like. Is there any particular reason why this post should even stand out on X like in 2025 anyway? It's the only reason why is because the main thing that stood out to me is that Elmo still has an official account on that site. Like why? Like why are they who is Sesame Street trying to reach on a site with that is like filled with guys who have spinning swastika eyes like in their avatars. And if you had like particularly like if you take like any handful of tweets that are on there that my sock follows on there, they basically look like the Elmo tweet, but with just like a different it's just some idiot with activated eyes avatar like still holding on to that from 2018. Yeah, I
mean, I'm so desensitized. I feel like I barely batted an eye when I heard it, and it's like my personal conspiracy theory is that the right also loves to go after Miss Rachel, for supposedly, being anti-Semitic because she's used her platform like in an amazing way to highlight the devastation in Gaza and the impact on children. So my personal conspiracy theory is that like all of the children's entertainers are now coming after the Jews, and it's just I'm just joking.
And these transgressions, I should add, are saying things like, isn't it sad that tens and thousands of children have died? Like, and they're just like, enemy of the Jewish people, Miss Rachel.
To be clear, Miss Rachel, not anti-Semitic. Elmo's posts, yes, anti-Semitic. Yeah.
God. It's... To your point, Mike, I mean, the reason you have a profile for Elmo on X is presumably to like reach children, right? And like you just have to be a negligent parent at this point to like let your toddler roam around on X. Like these Elmo posts rank pretty low on like the severity of things your child would likely encounter using X, including from the platform owner, right? It's just like,
it's like letting your child like wander around through the landscape of that game Silent Hill 2 and like just drowning in mutilated corpses and stuff like that. My kids, for instance, like they're on like YouTube Shorts, and I'm always like paranoid they're going to run into Tim Pool or something like that. This is a case where there's not one Tim Pool to run into, and then Tim Pool is probably your like softest landing.
Ben, we thought to invite you on because during the Jeffrey Epstein episode, towards the end, we started talking about anti-Semitism surrounding the whole Jeffrey Epstein blowback and just I mean, God, what a shit show that has been for the Trump administration. And, Mike, you made the point, and I think it was a good one, that this sort of rank anti-Semitism that has surrounded it, that sort of pulses through the MAGA base, is probably under-indexed in conversations or discussions about anti-Semitism. So we thought it'd be great to have you on to talk about what solidarity with Jewish people looks like at a time where, these groups are sort of shrugging off anti-Semitism in the Trump base while also claiming that, people must be fired because somebody hacked the Elmo account and posted hateful messages. On that note, there has been a development on this Epstein stuff. Did you guys see the Wall Street Journal story about, they're really pissed about that lately.
Some of them are. I think some of them are actually like leaning into it. Like the Nick Fuentes types are actually leaning into the Wall Street Journal stories like further. But he was saying that he was calling the MAGA movement the biggest scam in the history of populism or whatever. Like it was something like that. I think what Fuentes said, and I thought it was actually kind of interesting, not like he's interesting, thinker or something like that, but I thought it was revealing of something, which is he said that now we have to look at it like, he's a scam and he's helped usher in us. Like he's the vehicle for us to get going, and Trump has sort of been exposed, and it's not the other way around. We are now leading him, and he's just some sort of placeholder.
Yeah. I mean, it remains to be seen, like, how much of the MAGA base is really that mad at Trump about this. I've also, seen some polling showing that he still has high approval. Who knows if this is like a mostly online thing? Of course, a lot of the mostly online MAGA folks, end up, driving the energy and the fuel of MAGA over the long run. But I mean, not to say that I agree with Nick Fuentes, but like, it is true that, if Trump keeps covering up this Epstein stuff, which clearly implicates him, because it clearly implicates him, there's just going to be more energy for folks to the right of him and more space, for other folks to say, yeah, Trump is compromised, but we are the real America First agenda, and we're even more fascist, even more nationalist, than he could ever be.
That's a very good point, and that's something I'm like actually really scared about, and I'm glad that you mentioned it, which is that my only fear is that if Trump really is consumed by the Epstein scandal and that sort of takes him down, and he's seen as being sort of tainted by this guy who's tied up with all these anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, which, again, to be clear, haven't been disproven necessarily. Some of them, we don't know whether Epstein was tied to Mossad or something like that. But, if Trump goes down that way and he's seen as kind of a figurehead or whatever, the next iteration of this could be quite organized and scary. And maybe we don't see it right away, but maybe we see it in 10 years or something. And that'd be really scary. I just wanted to, Jared, I mentioned I would say this, like, on here, I just want to just quickly say that there's a lot of people trying on the right, like the Jack Posobiec class of idiot, like Cernovich, obvious hoax. This is an obvious hoax. It's an obvious hoax. It's an obvious hoax. This is a hoax, right? You see a lot of people making these comments or whatever. It's not a hoax, and I'm just going to say, like, straight up, like I have done reporting for Wall Street Journal before, and like I did a series on prisons while I was in India, and it was supposed to be 6 stories long, and I did 4 of the 6 because 2 of them were killed in legal. And they paid for all the travel. It gave me like a lot of detail, and they were killed because it was like, well, we don't know. We don't have it was like really tight. Like we had not got enough of a response from the Kashmir police on this. We don't have enough response on the from the Indian army on this and stuff. And they would kill it. And when I worked at Storyful also, which is owned by Dow Jones, the same thing. And it was the same thing. It's the most strict standards and practices I ever dealt with. That includes ABC News. And other relatively conservative outlets. The news division at Wall Street Journal is considered to be extraordinarily rigorous. And like the idea that this is a hoax is just flatly not. The story is true. I'm not even saying is likely true. It is true, period.
If that was even a possibility, it was not getting published by the Wall Street fucking Journal of all places, which like editorially if anything, is like bent conservative towards business, right?
Yeah.
Like it's just like
I'm just saying it's just true, period. Because everybody who's up at the top didn't want this to get published because they were too scared, I'm sure. So it had to go through a tremendously rigorous process. And I would presume also they had it for a while and did not rush it. The timing may be to a degree coincidental. I have no evidence of that, but that's just based upon the fact that it just takes so long. I guess the Epstein thing has been rumbling for a couple of weeks now, so maybe they had it and they've been developing it for a while, and then they really fought to get it out now for the timing. But anyway, I just wanted to put that out there, and we can move on. I just want to say it's definitely real. Trump definitely drew boobs for Jeffrey Epstein. He definitely said we share the same proclivities in so many words, and then we have like these wonderful secrets or whatever the fuck.
Yeah, enigmas never age. It's just like so transparently sketchy. It's just like so incriminating.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Never. Yeah. Yeah. It's just like our secret is child sex, like, is essentially what I read from that. Anyway, carrying on.
And from what I've heard, and these are just like rumor mill rumblings, the Wall Street Journal reaching out for a comment on this story may have been why there was such an abrupt turn by the Trump administration on these Epstein files. It is possible that is why Trump changed his tune so fast to try to get his base to move on. But they've been largely unsuccessful, right? So now his base has to contend with this. But Ben, let's talk about anti-Semitism.
Yeah, it might have some relation. I mean, what you were saying earlier, it's so, maddening to those of us, who watch this for a while, that, the right, and many Democrats, and most establishment discourse, right, and groups like the ADL, have really flipped the script, and just, almost created, a fake news narrative and a moral panic that, the main threat to Jewish people, in this country is, college students who want an end to Israel's genocide in Gaza, while, the very first day of the new Trump administration, Elon Musk, the richest person in the world, made a Nazi salute at the inauguration, right? There's just, like high Trump administration officials like, what's that guy's name? I forget his name, but, there are little groypers and like Andrew Tate supporters in the high echelons of the administration, right? I could go on and on, but the kind of real anti-Semitism, as you said, coursing through the MAGA base and the leadership is just totally obscured and downplayed. And everyone is just, told to redirect to, to those of us, who support justice for Palestinians. It's just the most maddening, psyop, if you want to call it that, or just, inversion that it just really makes it hard right now.
Yeah. I was trying to remember like which Trump administration official you might have been talking about, and several came to mind, which I think is kind of, illustrative of the problem you've identified here.
Well, I wanted to, on that note, I want to do this up front rather than like in the back, which is, I want to talk about just quickly before we move on to some of the egregious stuff that has been going on around the use of anti-Semitism. So I just want to talk about like legitimate left-wing anti-Semitism. I say that as somebody who the White House like said a statement when I reached the Stephen Miller emails. I think the White House had some sort of thing. It was like the author is a left-wing anti-Semite. I remember that like stinging me so badly because it was pure. You would never even get it from a social media read. It was purely my racial makeup being like part Arab, or just sort of like identified through video. We know he's Arab, must be an anti-Semite. Like, right. It was really difficult. I remember at the time I'm feeling really hurt, but like being an Arab and left-wing, I wonder like, it does exist to some degree, right? Like you do see some stuff that's out there. I have seen, for instance, we're definitely going to talk about the word Zionist as a pejorative and like whatever. And like there's obviously you have to be able to make criticisms of Zionism as any serious person, including even if you're Israeli, you should be able to be critical of it, right? Because it's not a solid set thing necessarily even there. I guess my question is like, how prevalent do you think it is? And like, how do you actually identify it when you see it, because I feel like we're entering a stage where people have become so cynical about the idea of anti-Semitism in left spaces. People are so angry, there's so much hurt that they don't even look at it.
No, I think you're really right that, because of all these accusations that are often cynical, people don't want to look at it, and we shouldn't be surprised in many ways that, of course, there's anti-Semitism that comes up in left-wing spaces. I mean, there's misogyny that comes up in left-wing spaces. There's anti-blackness. You could go, on down the line. I mean, people who speak as leftists, who go to rallies, who join organizations or whatever, are just people, and we bring all of the biases that we inherit, in our society until we do the work of, unlearning them. So, I think there's sometimes like a panic that can come up, or an understandable fear for people who are Jewish, that like, if there's any anti-Semitism that we might encounter in left-wing spaces, we just have to run or sever all ties or go to Twitter. And, it's like, I think, some of the ways it can come up is like, in conspiracy theory thinking.
Yeah.
I mean, anti-Semitism is a conspiracy theory of who sits at the highest heights of power. Like the story it tells is there's an elite cabal of Jews who are pulling the strings, and the left is concerned with power.
Right.
The left wants to figure out who's behind the scenes, how the world works. And so there's a danger that conspiracy thinking, can come in, not only about, Israel sometimes, but the way that we understand the economy. I mean, I was around and during Occupy Wall Street, sometimes you would hear about the Rothschilds or the Illuminati, or the hidden hand behind the Federal Reserve.
Right.
That stuff. It can be overplayed, but it can be there.
Yeah.
So that's one important way. I think it's important just to kind of learn about that and sharpen our analysis of capitalism and of all the systems at play, so we don't make the mistake of thinking there's like a hidden cabal, whether it's Jews or the Illuminati or whoever.
Yeah, where I see it, and I don't know if you've seen this, Jared. I'm thinking of a few people that I won't mention, but I have definitely seen people like drawing attention to the like dancing Israelis conspiracy around 9/11. Right, people who are obsessed with 9/11, and that one has been disproven. Even Gray Zone, for people who don't know that, is like a very conspiratorial site that has like, doesn't it have some sort of left wing? Not left wing. Excuse me. Doesn't it have some sort of like Russia ties? Am I wrong, Jared? Like,
yeah. So it's had to deal with that a lot. They're a very like conspiratorial publication that often covers matters of foreign policy, and like many conspiratorial publications that cover those policies from this sort of self-described positioning as like anti-imperialism or whatever, they end up drawing sympathies and kind of backing into the corner with governments that their own countries are hostile to, including Russia, right? And there's been a whole host of things, allegations about funding and that sort of stuff. So we don't have time to go through all of that. Yeah. Maybe that's another episode.
Yeah, that's a good idea, actually. But so my point is that I think even Gray Zone did a debunk of dancing Israelis. And for people who don't know it, it's this idea that there's like these 5 Israeli national people and men, I think, and they're all like, there's someone saw them or reported them dancing as the Twin Towers fell, or whatever, and it was they looked into it pretty, it was pretty thoroughly debunked. Everybody has looked into it, the timing of it, the possibility that it happened, and I think like people can't imagine, for instance, that 9/11 could just been performed by terrorists because of the implications that happened after. And yes, some of those implications may have benefited folks like Netanyahu to some degree, people who are like, very, warlike in their perception of their surroundings or whatever. But that coincidences also happen, right? To some degree, and we know who flew the planes into the tower, because we have eyes and we've seen what happened for decades now. But yeah, no, I mean, now that we've kind of established that it is a thing, let's talk a little bit more about why I think the door is open for anti-Semitism kind of grow in left spaces, and that is the sort of labeling of critics of Israel as anti-Semitic. And I guess what I would ask is, Canary Mission is one group we already mentioned. Who else is really doing this right now? The Trump administration, but who else is really doing it?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back ultimately, to the 70s, but it really picked up steam in the early 2000s with the rise of the BDS movement, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, as civil society, groups around the world started to call for boycotts and for divestment. A lot of organizations, of Israeli agencies and pro-Israel organizations in the U.S. and around the world have really developed this language. And here in the U.S., some of those organizations, claim to speak for the American Jewish community. Groups like the Anti-Defamation League, of course, and its CEO Jonathan Greenblatt. Of course, they increasingly don't speak, for the American Jewish community. More and more of us are deeply critical of what's going on in Gaza and what Israel has been doing to Palestinians, for a long time. And it's also, groups like Christians United for Israel and its leader, Pastor John Hagee, right? Christians United for Israel has, I think, 11 million members, and that's more than the entire American Jewish community, right? So Christian Zionist groups also play a big role in this. And like you said, the Trump administration and also the Biden administration, most bipartisan leaders in the political establishment have adopted this talking point. So it's really pervasive. But I think, like I said, more and more American Jews are beginning to see through it, and most of the base of the Democratic Party is seeing through it. And increasingly, some parts of the MAGA movement are also growing critical of U.S. support for Israel. And so it's a bizarre phenomenon now to see people like Tucker Carlson who are saying some things that we on the left would say, but he's filtering it through like a nationalist and a conspiracy theory lens that is just really mind-boggling to watch.
So I'm curious to get your thoughts, Ben, just on why this is damaging ultimately to the fight against anti-Semitism, because anti-Semitism is legitimately a real problem. It's a real dangerous problem with a very bloody track record. It can put Jewish people in a lot of danger when these attitudes percolate through society. But the conflation between criticism of the Israeli government or criticism of Zionism with anti-Semitism, categorizing it in the same sort of bucket as things that motivate things like the Tree of Life synagogue shooting, right? Or I'm thinking of Jonathan Greenblatt, the ADL CEO, comparing pro-Palestine protesters to Klan members, I think is what he did a couple years ago. That kind of conflation, that kind of use of the term anti-Semitism or the use of that label to bludgeon critics of U.S. support for Israel, like, why is that damaging? Why is that? Why should people feel alarmed by that, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's it's damaging for free speech. I mean, a lot of the efforts to silence critics of Israel are rewriting free speech laws, shutting the First Amendment. We have groups like the Heritage Foundation who are using this template to push for policies that are dismantling universities, that are we've seen arrests of deportation and threatened deportation of folks like Mahmoud Khalil. That basically, I mean, there are ways this fight is now being weaponized by the Trump administration to threaten citizenship, to deport non-citizens with really frightening implications. And also, for, like the, like you said, like you mentioned the Tree of Life shooting. The reality is that the most violent anti-Semitism, comes from the right, from the white nationalist movement, right? And it's horrific, really. It's insulting to equate the worst synagogue shooting in American history with speech on a college campus that might make some Jewish students uncomfortable, right? It's insulting to equate political critique of the state of Israel or the ideology of Zionism with anti-Semitism. I mean, this is a political critique that calls for equality in a nation state, and that's just categorically not the same thing as hatred of Jewish people or of conspiracy theories. And arguably, I think some of this stuff, can increase anti-Semitism. Yeah, when Trump arrests Mahmoud Khalil and tweets out, Shalom Mahmoud, right? His administration as a largely Christian nationalist administration, right? Groups like the Heritage Foundation who are pushing for this, these are Christian nationalist groups. And what they're doing is they're slapping a big old Star of David on their push to destroy American democracy. And, they're teaching people to equate, Jewish power as they see it, this anti-Semitic idea with fascism, essentially. So there's ways that I think it actually, if you tell people that they can't have free speech, because because it might make Jews upset because it's anti-Semitic, people are going to say, wait, Jews seem to have a lot of power to crush free speech, and that's just it's mostly Christian nationalists who are running this right now, and so I think it's actually can increase anti-Semitism in this really fucked up way.
Yeah, to your point, I have seen some bleed over, but there's a phrase that white nationalists use, Jewish supremacy. You'll see that a lot. Like, it's like, oh, this is Jewish supremacy. Like, it's just sort of inverting the white supremacist idea and kind of saying this is ultimately Jews run everything and they control us or whatever. And what's interesting is it does feel like some Jews are involved in this, of course, but it does feel like it's actually many white people like Trump and others who like are kind of embracing this sort of, just sort of like almost using the mask of a Jewish person to come down on the people with some form of supremacy or some sort of authoritarianism. And I think it's really polluting people's understanding of who is involved here and where power lies. And I actually think one thing that helps me, of course, as like I said, an Arab person who is not Jewish, who has criticisms of Israel, for instance, is to often, this is editorializing, not asking a question, but I'm curious what you think of it, is like, I always try to unite my critique of Israel with a critique of the United States, because to a degree, it is an extension of United States foreign policy. And until Tucker Carlson kind of gets his way with whatever isolationist, nationalist thingy, whatever, it is really just an extension of the United States in many ways.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I think it's important to, there's this other white nationalist phrase that, David Duke started using in the Zionist occupied government, and we've actually do sometimes see that phrase and, on some ostensibly left-wing account, on X or whatever. Like, that's the thing. A lot of this stuff is just on the internet and people just, retweet it, not necessarily knowing where it comes from. But like you're saying, that gets it backwards. The idea that the U.S. supports Israel because the government is, occupied by like a Zionist cabal. The reason the U.S. has supported Israel since the 70s is access to, oil and to trade, and as a beachhead in the Cold War and later the War on Terror, right? There's a shared resonance, a shared mythology between these two countries. Both are essentially, settler colonies. We could go on and on, but yeah, I totally agree with you that it's helpful to look at it that way.
When I see the Zog thing come from left-wing spaces, it usually is in relation to AIPAC, which is legitimately spooky. Like the idea that like so much money goes to these politicians, and now we have this genocide going on in the middle. It actually, when you look at it, you're like, whoa. I mean, it inspires conspiratorial thinking. I think for me, I have to give. It's not like I got to hand it to the conspirators or whatever, but you have to at least admit. It's almost like the Epstein thing. That it looks extremely fucked up and you have an emotional response to it because like in your own life, everybody is short $10, right? We're all running around like, we're all $1 short for literally everything we do. So we're frustrated. We're living in hell. That's the nature of American capitalism. And like, it's very easy to find a scapegoat when you see that amount of money kind of pouring in. I will add though, I don't want teasers from a future story I'm doing, but like I have seen up close evangelicals who are not, as far as I know, getting paid by Israel, putting an Israeli flag like next to the stage where they give their speech, making Zionism like more important seemingly than Christianity almost in there. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, how centered it was in a sermon that was a mostly anti-gay, anti-LGBTQ sermon. So that I saw in Idaho. Very bizarre thing for a Northeastern dude to see. Anyway, my point is that I think it's coming from this critique around AIPAC, and I think it's important to point out that some of these people will do this for free. It's not clear to me at all if Ted Cruz needs money to shill for Israel, in quotes, as you know, his trolls will say.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, AIPAC is a lobby. It's a powerful lobby, like the gun lobby, like the the weapons industry lobbies, and which a lot of not tiny amount of overlap there. And I agree, it's definitely important to be on guard against conspiracy theory thinking, and to be able to name the real power that groups like AIPAC hold as one part of this larger constellation of interests that prop up U.S. support for Israel, for sure. The last thing we'd want to do is to say like, oh, we shouldn't criticize them, or to downplay the real power they do hold here. So yeah.
Yeah, on the topic of lobbying, if you want your head to really spin, you can look at AIPAC lobbying, and then you could also just look at lobbying for like, I don't know, the pharmaceutical industry or like health insurance companies. That shit's wild. This is a symptom of a problem bigger than some secret cabal or whatever. So in your book, Ben, Safety Through Solidarity, A Radical Guide to Fighting Anti-Semitism, I'll put a link to that in the description, you and your co-author Shane Burley kind of laid out a retrace of anti-Semitism and how it's been talked about in society, and try to think through an alternative way of thinking about it, an alternative way of talking about it. I guess my first question is, what prompted you and Shane to embark on that? Certainly, to the length of a book. I've been talking to Mike as he's been writing his book, and it sounds like a fucking nightmare. Yeah. So you guys must have felt this was pretty important.
I mean, I will say, having a co-author made it easier. Yeah, Shane Burley is amazing. He's a journalist who also tracks the right, and it was definitely easier only having to write half a book, and still it took us years. We actually, it's funny, we turned in the what we thought was the final draft like a few days before October 7th, and then we were like, oh wait, we need this back, and we were able to add in a few things. But it's like an export out of Adobe Premiere, where it's like version 1 final 2 final 1 totally
version 3.
Yes, so many Google Docs. But I think it was precisely this frustration that drove both of us to want to do this together. I mean, I come out of the Palestine solidarity movement, and the kind of fight the right research world, and so for years I worked on college campuses, and I saw the way that these anti-Semitism charges had been used to silence critics of Israel. Shane also was involved with his campus Students for Justice in Palestine chapter. And he spent years in anti-fascist organizing in the Pacific Northwest. So we saw the way that anti-Semitism charges are so misused, and the real threat of anti-Semitism. The rising alt-right. Shane was there on the streets in Portland, facing off with the Proud Boys and so many other groups. And so we just I remember the deep dives I did, reading Kevin McDonald and all the alt-right shit in 2017, and being like, this is real. And we just knew.
For people who don't, I'm always the one who stops things to introduce somebody in case you don't. So you can't just blow through Kevin McDonald
for sure
without it, because he is
no relation to the Big Mac.
He is how would you describe him? Like an academic who's brain melted. What would you describe this guy? He's written one of the more beloved texts of the alt-right era, Culture of Critique.
Yeah, no, he's like the intellectual godfather, I guess you could say, of their anti-Semitism. So just stuff like that, as both of you were, and so many of us were, just seeing the rise of the anti-Semitism that was like, coursing through the alt-right. And also the way that these conspiracy theories can sometimes show up in our own ranks. I mean, that's the thing. Like, Shane has stories in the Pacific Northwest of like seeing in the anti-war movements, some of these conspiracy theorists who would get a platform there too. So basically, we were like, we need a better analysis of this stuff. Like the ADL is not cutting it. The ADL is like, working with cops to, tell people not to, to take to the streets in Charlottesville. The ADL was not, rising up to the task at hand. We needed like an analysis of anti-Semitism that put it back into social movements that says like, how can we fight this through a bottom-up, grassroots approach of allying with, different marginalized communities and fighting for a better world together.
Let's talk about ADL, actually. Not to do a sequel. We did an episode of about ADL with Vegas Tenold, who worked there for, I think, about a year or so. And he had a few stories for us. At the time we did it, they had just praised the Trump administration for what happened with Khalil. Since then, we've seen, I think, more of the same. It's like I feel like in my most intimate chats, my closest like chats were Jared, Hannah, Bob Silverman, right? It's always like we're in our signal things, whatever. It's always like, who's going to tweet out this thing we all want to criticize about what ADL just said? Like, it feels like it's usually not me because I hate being online. But what's going on there? Because has ADL always been like this? Because I feel like they become like, I have started, as somebody who is in SPLC, like the Pepsi to their Coke, and knew them. Is it me? Have they gotten worse? I feel like they've always been pretty bad. And I was naive and wanting to believe they're okay. But I feel like they've just, maybe it's October 7th. For people who don't remember that episode or don't know, Jonathan Greenblatt is the CEO of ADL. You see him on TV if you watch Morning Joe, if you see like Fox and Friends. I don't know if he's on Fox or he's on Fox. And he is like, focused like a laser, tunnel vision on calling people anti-Semitic. That's basically his only conversation point. He's got very little nuance. I'm just curious, like, have they always been bad or did they get worse? Because it does feel like they have become more reactionary after October 7th. And it does feel like they are doing a tremendous amount of damage to the label anti-Semitic, in the sense that I almost be like scared to use it in some ways. Like, I'd be very careful how to use it because of the way they use it.
I think it's both and. I think, they've always been not great. And there's, over the years, there's been good people who've worked there and done good work. And so, you want to acknowledge that and feel for the people, if there are any who are still doing really good work, who are still trapped there now. But I think, they do have a history of, if you really want to go back to it, through the 80s of, they've always kind of taken this approach of like, extremism is an equal problem on both sides of the political spectrum. And so, even back in the 80s, there were lawsuits that exposed how they were surveilling left-wing groups, in addition to neo-Nazi groups. They have always, they went after, Arab American academics who were critical of Israel's oppression, during the, after 9/11, their last CEO, how am I blanking on his name? He was like, he led the organization for decades. Anyway, ADL leadership, joined like the Islamophobic chorus and saying that there shouldn't be like a mosque built, near Ground Zero. There's all these ways in which they have always been not great, and since October 7th, under the leadership of Greenblatt, they've gotten a lot worse. I mean, this guy's essentially, he comes from the private sector, right? He came from the Obama administration. He was, I think, the CEO of kind of like a green, water company. So, he's like a water salesman.
I didn't know that. Is that true?
Yeah. He sold water.
What the fuck? Okay. interesting. That's very interesting, and it's also seems to be like work. If you ever see him speak, that resonates.
Welcome to Tony Martignetti Nonprofit Radio. Big nonprofit ideas for the other 95%. You're with me on our live coverage of the Next Gen Charity Conference after party. We're at Johnny Utah's, and my guest now is Jonathan Greenblatt. Jonathan is the founder of Ethos Water, which everyone is familiar with.
To me, there is a strong danger of people tuning out any conversation on anti-Semitism because of these folks. And the next thing I would say is, like, in your opinion, I mean, is ADL an organization that is supposed to fight anti-Semitism, or is that a sort of front to protect Israel from criticism? Because it's starting to feel like the second thing to me. And that is not the way I thought of them before. I mean, even if they were bad, I thought that they were really like, okay, well, they're laser focused on this issue and whatever. And they may be more conservative if, leaning, but now it feels like it's really primarily a vehicle to protect Israel from criticism of the genocide. Asking
questions like that, it feels like conspiratorial, right? To even go there, because it's like, oh, they say this thing, but they've actually got this other agenda. But if you just observe the activity of the organization and what they choose to speak out on, I think it is a fair question. So, like, how do we kind of ask harder questions like that get us kind of close to the tinfoil hat, but might be grounded in truth? Like, how do you think about navigating questions like that without veering into what we've been talking about, which is this, going into conspiracy zone and entertaining legit anti-Semitism, which I don't think any of our listeners, and certainly none of us here, would ever. There's not, a red blood cell in our heart that I think wants to indulge that kind of stuff.
I don't think it's, obviously I'm not peering into the boardroom meetings or the heart of Jonathan Greenblatt, but my sense is that they aren't, cynically, claiming to fight anti-Semitism, but they're actually, just purely a front for defending Israel. I think it's a little murkier than that. I think that they actually, do believe that they're fighting anti-Semitism, and that they think the primary threat right now is from people wearing keffiyehs and waving Palestinian flags. And I think that's just a wrong-headed approach. Like, I think it comes from, like, not to make too much of the generational divide, because I know, like, a lot of, boomers and people who are older than that who support justice for Palestinians. But there is, I think, also a generational divide there where, like, I think a lot of older folks do, like, strongly support Israel from how they grew up and the time that they lived in. And really the ADL, just like so many other hollowed out institutions, is, it has its directives, disproportionately dominated by a geriatric, donor class. And, it's a legacy establishment institution, right? So in many ways, it's like a crisis of democracy in the American Jewish community. Many, many American Jews are really aghast at what Jonathan Greenblatt especially is doing. I mean, he's just made like a mockery of the organization and of the cause of fighting anti-Semitism. And, he's cast his lot with MAGA, and like 80% of American Jews, did not vote for Donald Trump. And so I think it's like, it's their donor priority. So it's not that they're coordinating with the Israeli government, though. I mean, it's possible that's happening in some form. And if that is happening, it's not because there's some like, shadowy, duplicitous, Jewish nature. They are a legacy organization who reflects, like one interpretation of fighting anti-Semitism, and also like they reflect the political class they're a part of. Right. And they've never been a radical organization. They've always been suspicious of left-wing and progressive social movements. And that's who their donors, represent. And so, yeah, I think that's the kind of way to understand it.
I want to remind our listeners from the last time we talked about ADL that they were apparently monitoring Black Lives Matter demonstrators recently. So we don't need to go back to the 80s. We can just think not too long ago. So on the whole, avoiding anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, I'd like to introduce you to once again to my friend Jeff Epp.
Jeffrey Epstein.
It's coming to Jeffrey Epstein. It's going to Jeffrey Epstein and Yay podcast, which is really it's like the two sides of brain rot. So here's the thing. We covered this a little bit last time. Pizzagate, big pedophilia conspiracy theory thing that had some element of anti-Semitism among some of the people who believed in it. But, I would say probably the majority of them were mostly obsessed with the idea of liberal elites and, whatever, enemies of Donald Trump. It mutated into QAnon. That was like a big deal, bigger than Pizzagate in many ways. And that also had an anti-Semitic element that kind of was part of it. But I think, Jared, you would agree, not the main part of QAnon. For some people it became.
There were some like thematic similarities, but I don't think the majority of QAnon believers had anti-Semitism like as a core motivating belief.
Yeah.
Even if the themes kind of rhymed.
Yeah. And that's like an aside, but that's I think a helpful distinction. It's not always when we say like anti-Semitism is a big problem in the MAGA movement, it's not that like everyone under that category holds this like conscious hatred of Jews in their hearts that they're thinking about all the time. It's like a way of thinking. It's like where these conspiracy theories, all came from and like where they lead if you dig deep enough on the internet. But yeah, I like that distinction.
I think that there's a transition period between what happened, from QAnon to sort of this. There's overlap with Jeffrey Epstein's story, right? That's happening in the background, and more news is being uncovered as QAnon goes along. And then he, air quotes, committed suicide. Sorry, and sorry.
There are some conspiracies out there.
Yeah. So he goes and and disappears. His little island in the sky, and QAnon starts to fall away, and the real story, the real pedophile conspiracy story starts to take hold, I think, on the right. And it is a conspiracy of somebody. Conspiracy can be defined in different kinds of ways. I mean, the fact that there's people trying to protect themselves from being seen having sex with children is a conspiracy, right? Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell were involved in a conspiracy together. It starts to become a bigger and bigger thing. And this time, there is like the anti-Semitic element of it is not, they don't have to conjure up too much to get there. And there's a few reasons why. One, Ghislaine Maxwell's father was widely believed to be a Mossad agent, died under suspicious circumstances, actually. Then you have his relationship to Les Wexner, who has ties to Israel, apparently. And you have members of the Israeli government or whomever coming and going, or at least one or two people, right, coming and going from his New York residence, right? So this starts to trigger this thought that he's possibly a Mossad agent or connected to Mossad in some way or working for Mossad. I want to put out the possibility that it is possible that he's not a Mossad agent, but also connected to Mossad in some way. That is possible, right? Like that, you could be like,
even if it's just like personal friends,
right? He could be coming for yeah, or he could just, they come for information and he gives it, right? It could be something like that, right? I mean, or they ask him for a favor and he does it. I mean, there could be something there. It doesn't have to be directly, but he also has this shadowy, business finance like background, which is like nobody really fully understands. So like it raises a lot of weird questions. So yeah, I just want to ask, what do you see happening with this story right now? I'll just tell you that I see it really starting to explode on the right. And I think it's a kind of a wave that is taking a lot of random Trump supporters with them. In this anti-Semitic kind of like conspiracy land. And to be clear, we don't know that it's not true, right? Like it could be that he does have this connection to Mossad. I'm just curious what your thought is about it is. What are the dangers potentially? How do we even talk about it? I mean, if you don't have answers to all those questions, that's okay, because it is really challenging.
No, I mean, I think the way to talk about it there's a spectrum between what you just said, which is like a reasonable attempt to, trace these connections. I mean, like, all you have to do is, read Noam Chomsky or, pay attention to know that, like, this is the way that power works. As you said, there are connections between intelligence agencies and the military industrial complex and folks in finance, and elite folks like to hang out and they like to not show what they're doing. Sometimes you can read about, the plans of the capitalist class in the pages of the Financial Times, and sometimes they like to meet and not, put it out there. So there are conspiracies
that's
of
the whole
power.
reason so many of them have private yachts, right? It's not that they all love maritime exploration. It's just that is incredibly private, right?
Yeah.
These are larger than life elite people, and they're willing to pay out the nose for a fancy boat so that they can go out in the middle of the ocean and get some privacy.
Yeah.
Right?
Like a lot of power happens on the golf course, right? I know you love golf, Jared. We talked about that a few weeks ago. Not to come after golf here.
Unfortunately, not a lot of power happening in my golf game, but...
But like, yeah, there's a difference between that and, what Candace Owens said yesterday of like, Israel is the master of the universe. Look at the Star of David. It's an occult symbol that Aleister Crowley used to, what conspiracy theories do is they try to, peek under the surface of some of this stuff and just, draw like a fantastical story of like the hidden hand behind the scenes. And so I think it's important, and that can be seductive, for people who might just be getting radicalized, or who might have a lot of parts of their analysis that are progressive and that are left wing. But who can understand, how Wall Street works, right? So there is so I think it's important, like you said, to be honest and to look at, the sick, fucked up stuff Jeffrey Epstein did, and to be able to ask questions and trace connections, and also just, learn about anti-Semitic tropes. You could try to check yourself and, realize that ultimately, like we said before, the reason the U.S. supports Israel is not because of cabal. There is not like a cabal of all powerful Jews who run everything, like power is a lot more complicated than that. And so I think just kind of holding that in your head as you try to sort through this stuff is really important.
I think one thing that's worth noting is that I do think that Israel and the place they currently hold in the world and the number of conflicts that surround Israel makes this like a much bigger thing, than it would otherwise normally be for specifically Jews. And what I sort of mean by that is that like I never really saw anti-Black conspiracy theories around P. Diddy. You never do. I mean, even from these like these idiots online that are like, oh, actually, to be clear, some of them are not idiots. Some of them are just their direction is misplaced, and they may have sometimes they have other mental health issues and whatever. Some of them are actually, too smart to be doing what they're doing. But I never saw them being like, oh, well, now we see what Black people do. It was never like that, because you just have this very famous, I was supposed to say rapper, but he can't be called a rapper because he's got no game. He's a producer, money making person in the music industry, a person who made money in the music industry. That's Diddy.
During a certain period of time, P. Diddy was like a kingmaker in music. I
officially saw Wu-Tang with my son. It was fantastic, and there was some actual rap there. But my point is that he sucked. But no, you never see this like so this is what happens when Black people get rich. Like they do, you never see anything like that. But what this element of like Israel and like this idea that Israel is siphoning our tax dollars and in order to build a sort of war machine for their own agenda or whatever, this is creating a lot of extra problems for ordinary Jewish people. And I hear like a friend of mine was like told me that like somebody like rejected her like that she met on a dating app because she was Jewish, and she's like, I'm not I'm not a Zionist, you know what I mean? But like it's becoming like really difficult for a lot of Jews, I think, and it's partly because people have maybe the conspiracies are the one are pushing it, but they're starting to create this atmosphere where this idea that being Jewish itself is toxic. And I'm just curious your thoughts about that.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's another important way to, to make sure that to fight anti-Semitism, whether it's in left-wing spaces or on dating apps, is not to subject Jews to litmus tests over their Israel politics, just because they're Jewish, right? I mean, it's like, and it's hard, because like the state of Israel says that it represents all Jewish people. So does Donald Trump. So does Jonathan Greenblatt. So does the leader of Christians United for Israel. Right. But I think it's incumbent on us to, both to separate the atrocities of the state of Israel from everyday Jewish people. And also to, I go one step further and also to say that the word Zionist, it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And, I think there are a lot of reasons why some American Jews might still identify as Zionists or might not be totally on board with, a critique of the very, basis of Israel being a Jewish state that, we, as a Jewish person who is anti-Zionist, I want to help them work through that. But I would also, argue that subjecting people like that to litmus tests, or demonizing them on that basis,
or social isolation.
Social isolation, yeah, exactly. So I think that is an important way to show solidarity with Jewish people. Just as we would for any group that holds a multiplicity of perspectives, right? Not excusing any support for horrific war crimes, but also being able to hold nuance and complexity in the way we deal with real human beings who are not Bibi Netanyahu.
So as we wrap up here, I ask you a big question, complicated question, but one that I know that you've thought a lot about, which is how can people, our listeners, us, as people who are opposed to what's happening in Gaza and that sort of thing, how do we remain steadfast in our solidarity with Jewish people while also not feeling, trying to navigate these sort of complicated questions about morality surrounding what's happening in the Middle East, surrounding critiques of power, surrounding all kinds of things? Because these are a lot of, at least on their face, seemingly opposed ideas, right? Of like, well, we want to support Jewish people. We acknowledge that some Jewish people might have reasons they feel are very valid or personal, or, we don't know until we ask, right, about why they would still be supportive of Israel as a Jewish state or whatever it may be, with, some of the alarming things that I think, we've all seen these videos and we've all seen these photos that have gone around of these horrors that have happened in Gaza. And a lot of us that are horrified by those videos are also horrified by our government's support of these conflicts, right? And how do we square all of that without compromising our want and that other direction on our moral compass that wants to support and like I said, show solidarity with Jewish people everywhere?
Yeah, no, I mean, this isn't like an electoral podcast, obviously, and I don't live in New York City, but, from what I've seen from afar of the way that, Zoran Mamdani's approached it, I think I agree with a lot of what he's doing, right? I mean, he is, being very clear in his Palestine solidarity politics, and he's not budging on them. And he's also, talking to Jewish communities, speaking very clearly about the need to fight anti-Semitism, recognizing it as a real problem and one that should be combated, wherever it shows up, and advancing real policies to fight anti-Semitism, not by silencing speech, but by investing in mental health services, investing in bystander trainings, investing in community resilience. I think on an individual level, just demonstrating that you care, that you know it's, anti-Semitism is real, and that you care about the safety of Jewish communities, including those whose politics you don't necessarily agree with, I think is really important. And in our book, we talk a lot about the importance of building coalitions, between, Jewish communities and other communities who are marginalized, and, under threat from rising authoritarianism and fighting for agendas that uplift, all of us, not investing in racist policing, not investing in the security or surveillance state, but, investing in mental health services, investing in communities, in neighborhoods, building relationships, not only building relationships after like a synagogue is attacked or a mosque is attacked, but already having those relationships in place. I mean, I think just, building our community resilience, and developing ways to think and talk about anti-Semitism that recognize that all of our struggles are connected, right? That it's not, it's part of rising authoritarianism. It's deeply connected to other forms of oppression in our world. And, I think that goes a long way, toward the approach that we need.
Well, Ben, thanks for joining and posting through it this week. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
And I just want to add one thing to Ben, which is that we mentioned previously that Arab, pro-Palestinian, etc. I am so grateful to Jewish intellectuals like yourself who fight so hard about this stuff. Because it's sometimes hard, I think, for Arabs to be able to do it because we're so afraid of, the consequences. Like anytime you say open your mouth, there are consequences. I've experienced it firsthand. I just want to say, I really appreciate it. I appreciate the solidarity. And you're great. You should be famous. That's always been my Ben Lorber opinion.
Totally. Right back at you, man. I appreciate it. Yeah.
Ben, where can people find your writing, your commentary? Where can people check out your work? Yeah, well,
definitely in my organization, Political Research Associates, we do amazing work in monitoring the far right and helping social movements fight back. And so you can find us at politicalresearch.org and all over the socials. And you can find me on Blue Sky or unfortunately on X still for some reason. But I appreciate it.
We'll link to all of that in the description. I'm a huge fan of Political Research Associates. Similar vein to Mike's comments about you. Another place that deserves a lot more credit for all the incredible work that's getting done there.
When I first started, doing this work in 2018, both of you have just shone a light on these bastards for so fucking long. And you've been such leading voices in the fight against authoritarianism. And I think we've all watched it, go from 4chan, all the way to the White House and back again. But, I really admire all the work you all have done, up close with these motherfuckers. And so, keep it up. And thanks for everything you all are doing.
Thank you. That means a lot, Ben, especially coming from you. And before we get out, I just want to do another plug for the tip jar that's down in the episode description. If you want to throw us $1 or $2, even a little bit goes a long way on this little bootleg thing that we're doing here.
You got to give or the site goes dark. You got to give.
We'll see you next week.
Bye, guys.
Through your veins, and I wanna know the truth.